Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands, and happy Valentine's Day, and welcome to our Valentine's Day special.
Today we'll be talking about some of our favorite movies about love on this totally unnecessary BS holiday. Okay, so each one of us has two movies that we want to talk about that kind of deal with love in some way. They may not necessarily be the most romantic movies in the world. I'm trying really hard not to pick breakup movies, which is difficult for me. But anyway, so what is your first movie that you want to talk about?
I mean, breakup movies could be.
Breakup movies are about love.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with Before Sunrise. So, Before Sunrise is directed by Richard Linklater. It was made in 1995, and it stars Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, which play the roles of Jesse and Celine. And they're basically these two people that meet on a train as it comes into Vienna, and then they decide to kind of hit the town for the night. It's that movie about finding all those things about a person for the first time and learning about them and what they think and how they feel about things and things they like.
It's exhilarating.
It's very exhilarating. This movie is filled with so much love. It's part of a three-part trilogy, actually. So there are two more films that follow it, called Before Sunset and Before Midnight. And so those movies definitely are more testing of their love. But Before Sunrise, I picked it because it's just it's that wonderful, happy movie that kind of shows you the beginnings of love. And I think this movie is just beautifully shot. There's scenes where these characters go through minutes of dialogue on end.
Yeah, I think this whole series has such lively conversation. Like, you feel like you're there with them, you want to argue with them. In this movie in particular, it has such positive and charming energy, which is not there quite as much in the next two films. But yeah, I love this film. This is actually one of the first films that we watched together, like one of the first great films we watched together. I watched this movie like ages ago, and then I had shared it with you. Interestingly enough, I think it was when Before Midnight was hitting theaters. So we watched this film, we watched the second film, and then we went to see Before Midnight in the theaters. But I remember you kind of observing the dialogue, and you were like, wow, this movie has really good writing. And I don't know, I got the impression that maybe you hadn't seen a lot of movies like this before at the time.
Yeah.
And it was like kind of this moment for you where that opened up some other types of filmmaking, perhaps.
Yeah, and a side note, in terms of relating to movies about relationships and love and why we're here for this Valentine's Day episode, it was kind of my first introduction to like indie movies. Like you were saying, like I just thought the writing in this movie was so brilliant because it was so realistic, but also the dialogue was so conversational and back and forth. I remember there's this fantastic scene in the bar at a pinball machine.
Oh yeah,
and they are literally having this conversation. It kind of goes deep into life and like existentialism a little bit, but I just love how they're having this conversation and they're just playing pinball at the same time. And I was just like, I was so wowed by this scene. I was like, how are they remembering all this dialogue and playing pinball at the same time? Another fantastic thing I love about this movie, or the Before series in general, I'm just going to widen it up because what Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy, and Richard Linklater do is that they kind of just sit in a room and they write it all together. And I just love it so much. It's just such a product of love.
Yeah. So my first film is actually Before Midnight, which is the third film in this series. I actually, if I had my way, I'd probably talk about the second film, but we had talked about that in a previous video, so I didn't want to talk about it again. The second film is amazing if anyone wants to watch it. This film is quite a pivot from the first film. So I think that if the Before series is about anything, it's about how love changes and how it's sustained. I think that people with a very cynical view of Before Midnight might call it like a movie about how love falls apart. I really don't view it that way. I think it's a film that honestly deals with the tribulations of being in a long-term relationship and how to continue to relate to one another and love one another and how much effort and perspective that takes and how often you have to say, I could say this really awful thing and I'm not going to. I'm going to try to understand the other person. That's something that they're failing at a lot of the time in Before Midnight, and it's something that they succeed at towards the end. I actually think it's a film that's remarkably optimistic about love for all its kind of honesty and sort of acrid view of it at times.
Yeah, I think it's really about the evolution of a relationship in a way, not necessarily in a pessimistic way, but just, when we found these two characters at the beginning of Before Sunrise, they were literally kind of just exploring Europe. They didn't
Yeah.
really have these big jobs that now they're grown up, and Before Midnight, they have two kids. So they kind of have all these distractions in a way. Kids aren't really a distraction, but they can be in terms of a relationship and how a relationship is working. You have to remember that you still have to make time for your relationship. And I think this movie shows the consequences of not taking that time.
Yeah, I think it shows a little bit the consequences too of being too in love with being in love. I think Ethan Hawke's character in particular has this really romantic idea about love, that it should be this kind of all-encompassing thing. And he has a lot of trouble dealing with the aspects of it that are imperfect, that are maybe like drastically imperfect. These films are really interesting because beyond being about the progression of love, they almost feel like Before Sunrise feels like a film you'd make in your 20s, Before Sunset feels like a film you'd make in your 30s, and Before Midnight feels like a film you'd make in your 40s. I mean, we're not in our 40s yet, but Before Sunset is kind of the film about you screwed up some stuff towards the end of your 20s and you have this feeling of renewal and you want something that's a little bit different after some disappointments. And then Before Midnight is about all of the disappointments you're dealing with in your 40s that maybe feel all encompassing if you don't have the right perspective or you're not looking at the right things all the time. I think this is acted in such an extraordinary way, and both the second film and the third film got screenplay nominations at the Oscars, so that's worth mentioning. The writing is really just incredible, and I think that they do these movies because they love them and because they're talking about something that's really important about love. It's a movie that I actually find really inspirational just because it's one of the most real portrayals of love I've ever seen on screen, especially the second film and the third film. So yeah, I just love Before Midnight.
So I think going from the Before series, I'm going to move on to Her, which is a 2013 film directed by Spike Jonze. And so Her stars Joaquin Phoenix, Scarlett Johansson, and Amy Adams. And so Joaquin Phoenix plays the character of Theodore, and he basically falls in love with his cell phone, his computer AI system, which the voice is played by Scarlett Johansson. Her name is Sam in the movie. And so what I love so much about this film is how it explores not only our relationships with other people, but also our relationships with technology. But of course, there's a bunch of things in Theodore's relationship to technology, and Sam in particular, that tell him and teach him so much about his own personal relationships in life.
It's an extraordinarily perceptive film about love. I think one of the most kind of hard-hitting films about love I've ever seen. When you hear some of the lines in this film, or you hear some of the things he talks about in regard to love, they're almost like these lost thoughts in the back of your brain where you say, oh my gosh, I've thought that too, and I never even realized it. There's a lot of that in this movie, and it goes about it in a way that's not cynical. It's soulful and it's tender, and it's really seeking the humanity in everything that it's exploring. I remember, so we saw this in the movie theater, and when it ended, the film just washed over us.
Oh my
right?
gosh.
And I looked to my right, and you're just like, whoa. And I'm feeling all of those things too. It's just it's a very profound film, and it gets to these things that you didn't even know were in your soul that it dug up.
I felt like I was hit by a truck at the end of this movie. Kind of but hit by a truck in a really good way.
Yeah, you feel like you understand yourself better after this movie ends.
Yeah, I felt like my soul kind of changed from watching this movie in a certain sense. But other than that, this is just such a fantastic movie. It's a feel-good movie. It's also something that kind of will, stir your soul and make you think about love in ways that you hadn't thought about before.
And both one of our favorite movies of the 2010s.
Oh,
the
yeah.
past 10 years.
This is probably in my top 5 movies of the past decade, and it's possibly number 1. It's hard. There's a mix.
Yeah, me too. So I can think of 2 connections to my next film. Number 1 is Her won Best Original Screenplay, and so did the film that I'm talking about. But number 2, Spike Jonze directed Charlie Kaufman's first 2 screenplays, which are Being John Malkovich and Adaptation. So I'm going to talk about a Charlie Kaufman film. Well, he wrote the film, but it's directed by Michel Gondry, called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So one of my favorite films ever. I think I saw this movie when I was 14, and I loved it then, and I love it more as I age, as I see all of these things about it that are so true about relationships. It stars Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet as Joel and Clementine, and they were in a relationship for a long time and they broke up, and the film has this kind of science fiction edge to it where there's this company that can erase somebody from your brain. So Joel finds out that Clementine had erased him, so he in turn decides to go have Clementine erased. Most of the film is inside his brain as these memories are being erased, and they're being erased in reverse order. So you start with when him and Clementine are at their worst in a relationship. So they start arguing with each other, they're saying terrible things to each other, and it works its way back to where they began, when things were more tender and things were more loving. And it helps him remember what was so good about the relationship in the first place, even if it's something that he doesn't want to stick with forever. I think this film kind of asks that essential question of, is it better to have lived and loved than to never have loved at all? Is it really beneficial to erase, this love from your life, even though it caused you so much pain? This film is extraordinary for so many reasons. I think one of the reasons I like it so much, and this is true of many Charlie Kaufman screenplays, is it has a great premise, but it doesn't just ride that premise. It goes deeper and deeper. So there's a great subplot in this film involving Kirsten Dunst and the doctor who owns the kind of mind erasing clinic.
Mark Ruffalo's in there as well.
Yeah, Mark Ruffalo's in there. So that's another interesting subplot that's kind of a tangent from this central idea. So the film it's just really not lazy. It doesn't ride its kind of great idea just all the way to the finish line. It's really interested in exploring it deeper. It's just, I can't speak enough about how creative this film is at every turn, how it keeps you on your toes. It's like distinct lack of laziness is crazy to me.
Yeah, I love so much how this film represents the a visualized depiction of, trying to hold on to your memories. There's these scenes of Jim Carrey kind of like pulling along Kate Winslet, trying to race her towards a different area to kind of keep him in his memories because the memories are being wiped from his mind. I just love those moments. I think it's so brilliantly kind of like visually depicted.
I also kind of love that this movie, spoiler if you haven't seen it, I mean, it's a 16-year-old movie, but they find out that they had erased each other towards the end of the film, and they seem to kind of decide that they need to try again anyway. And I think it speaks a lot to experience with love. Like when you're at the beginning of the stage of a love, you can't just not go through with it. You have to see it to its fruition, even if you have some sort of logical thing in your brain that says that this isn't going to end well.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's just a great, accurate depiction of kind of all the movies that we picked in a way. I guess a little bit less than Before Sunrise, but it ties into the rest of the series. So, but I think what these movies do in particular is they really deal with these deep emotions in human connection. And I think that's what just makes them so special.
And that's it for our Valentine's Day special.
We hope you loved this video. Do you get it? Because no, that's it.
Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.